Call the member for Deakin.
Well, thank you, Mr Acting Deputy Speaker. Look, it goes without saying that there's a great deal at stake in the debate we're having in this place. What is at stake is the future of our country, the future of our children, and the future of our children's children. And that's why I rise to add my comments to the debate, because I believe sincerely that the decisions the government's made in this budget are decisions made to preserve the future of our children and our children's children. There are clearly difficult decisions that have been made in this budget, but they are absolutely the right decisions. We've not taken any difficult decisions lightly, but we've taken them responsibly, because we know that if we don't stop the reckless spending, if we don't cut the labour waste, then the future is looking very grim for all Australians. And you can't speak about this budget without putting into proper context the position that Australia finds itself in after 6 years of Labor. As much as members opposite would like everybody to have a significant case of amnesia and forget about the absolute waste and reckless spending and complete mismanagement of the economy, we cannot have that sense of amnesia that the Labor Party would like. And I don't think that members opposite, when they formed government 6 years ago, consciously decided to take a budget surplus of $20 billion, $60 billion in the Future Fund, and to turn that into $50 billion deficits and over $300 billion of debt, rising to $667 billion. I wouldn't suggest that they were that callous that they deliberately sought to do that. But their complete and utter incompetence is something that they should hang their heads in shame for. And the fact that we have members opposite now getting up and criticising the remedial measures that are only required because of that incompetence is actually breathtaking for me. In any other form of society, in any other organisation, if you had the arsonists criticising those who were there to fix the problem, there would be absolute condemnation, and there will be absolute condemnation for this approach. So, putting into context where we were at when we inherited the budget from the former government, let's consider some statistics. Labor delivered $191 billion in deficits, plus $123 billion in deficits over the next 4 years. Indeed, today, because of Labor's record, we pay $1 billion of interest every month. And without remedial action, that will rise to $3 billion of interest every month. So in effect, Australia, if it was a household, the Australian government, if it was a household, is paying the interest on the mortgage on its credit card. That is what members opposite are advocating for every time they criticise the remedial measures taken in this budget. Because members opposite have not offered a mea culpa for the absolute outrageous state in which they left our budget. Members opposite don't even admit that there's a problem with the budget. I suppose that's how they can justify blocking $40 billion of savings measures in public pronouncements and in the Senate. And crucially, of those $40 billion of savings that are being blocked, $5 billion of those savings were those identified by the Labor Party and taken to the previous election by them as policy. So clearly, if you can't admit there's a problem, you cannot be a part of the solution. And that is the message to the Australian people. The Labor Party have vacated the space of repairing the budget. And every time they criticise remedial measures undertaken in this budget without offering solutions, without offering counter savings, that is what they're saying to the Australian people. I mean, yesterday, or 2 days ago, the Deputy Leader of the Opposition came out in effect promising $16 billion of additional spending in the foreign aid budget. I mean, it's outrageous. The Labor Party have now adopted an approach. We're talking about tens of billions of dollars is just a throwaway line and we'll just work out the numbers later on. Well, that was the approach of the last 6 years. That's not the approach of this government. The days of the Wayne Swan-esque approach to budgeting, which is to promise surpluses until you're blue in the face and then deliver deficits, are over. This is the first honest budget that Australians have seen in 6 years. And that's why I was elected in my great seat of Deakin. People spoke to me ad nauseum prior to the election about the worrying trajectory of debt that this country was taking on. And when we talk about the future of our children, what generation wants to be responsible for gifting to the next generation an inheritance of debt? How dare members opposite lecture us for taking the necessary decisions to fix their budget messes with completely ignoring that simple fact. So we didn't make the mess. We're not the arsonists. We didn't start the fire, but we will put it out and we will fix it because that's what we have been elected to do. Our budget, part of the government's economic action strategy, will ensure that debt which is projected at if no remedial action was taken to rise to $667 billion will be nearly $300 billion less. This is the prescription that the Australian people voted for in September last year, and unlike the Labor Party, we won't squib the challenge. We're repairing the budget to protect our living standards, to prepare for an ageing population, to ensure that we can respond to the unexpected events in the future and provide for future tax relief. We're not making these changes so we can squirrel more money away. We are making these changes for the future prosperity of our nation. Australia has had an unenviable economic record in the last 15 years. In the late 90s, we were able to successfully deal with the Asian financial crisis. In 2007 and 8, we were able to successfully deal with the GFC, notwithstanding a lot of waste. Why were we able to weather those two storms? It was because we had put money away for a rainy day. Like any household, like any business, you have to have some money set aside for a rainy day. And at the moment, I hate to say to Australians, we don't have that. If there were to be extraordinarily unexpected economic headwinds, Australia is not ideally placed and is certainly not placed where it was in 2007 to address those. So we're not just on an economic frolic to stash money aside for grandiose plans like the Labor Party. We are doing what's fundamentally right for the country and what's fundamentally right for the prosperity of our children. Alternatively, Labor would have the government spend our country to ruin. I've spoken about the $40 billion of savings that the Labor Party have pronounced that they'll be blocking. There have been significant black holes and time bombs in the forward estimates. I mean, the Labor Party, in their utter dishonesty, went to the former election claiming that there would be a surplus in 2016-17, and we find out that, in fact, if remedial action is not taken, Australia would suffer another 10 years of budget deficits. 16 years of budget deficits. There's no household in this country, there's no business in this country that could spend more than it earned for 16 consecutive years and still be viable. But members opposite don't care about that. They don't understand it. So what are we doing? We are fundamentally ensuring that the long-term spending trajectory of the budget is improved. To talk about cuts is wrong. The reality of this budget is it sets the medium to long-term spending trajectory of the budget and puts it into a more sustainable fashion. When we talk about health reforms, the government's delivering record funding for hospitals. In health, we're increasing overall spending by more than $10 billion, or 16% to 2017-18. In Victoria, importantly, hospital funding will increase each year from $3.6 billion to $4.7 billion. It just doesn't grow at the more than 10% a year, which Labor put it as a line item in the budget. If that trajectory was followed, health spending would skyrocket from $15 to $40 billion. Now, we know members opposite weren't necessarily expecting to win the last election, so they didn't feel too concerned about having these very grandiose and undeliverable promises in the forward estimates. Because if they did unexpectedly get elected, I'm sure what was going through their mind was, we'll just deal with that at the time. At the same time as increasing this funding, we're asking Australians to make a modest contribution to their own healthcare with a GP co-payment. And I get very angry when I see the indignation of members opposite when they talk about the co-payment. For most vulnerable people, the highest possible liability per annum that they will be subject to is $70. 10 visits, $70 per annum. Those same people right now are spending $550 additional each year per household because of the carbon tax. So where's the consistency? $550 on the carbon tax is completely justifiable in the minds of the Labor Party, but a $70 contribution per annum to your healthcare is not. In addition, one of the proudest things, and I will not walk away from this, one of the proudest things for me in the budget is the establishment of the Medical Research Future Fund, in which the GP co-payments for the next 6 years will contribute to build up the corpus of the fund to $20 billion, which will then provide an everlasting dividend to medical research in this country. And the absolute short-sightedness of the opposition in this respect is very disappointing. Why are people living longer today? They're living longer today because of the work of medical researchers in times gone by. Why are in some areas health costs or mitigation of health problems occur? Why are they occurring? Because of the medical research of yesteryear. So the least we can do in this generation is ensure that we give our medical researchers, of which we have a competitive advantage, we have the best researchers in the world, we need to give them the resources to find the cures of the future, to improve the life expectancy of our population, the livability of all Australians, and ultimately reductions in health costs into the future. In education reform, funding will increase every year under this budget. None of that changes. Forget the scaremongering of the opposition. Education spending is increasing, and not only that, reforms to higher education will ensure that more people from less advantaged backgrounds will have better access to higher education. I want to just finish by talking about some statistics. When I started speaking, I said that in order to grasp this budget, you have to understand the context in which it is being delivered. As much as members opposite would like to forget the last 6 years, forget the waste and profligacy, we need to appreciate the context. And there's another context that we need to understand about our entire system. In 1964, when average income per Australian was $26,000, in today's terms, government spent 3% of gross domestic product on welfare payments. In 2014, average incomes increased to $66,000. You'd expect welfare spending to have declined. No. It now consumes 9% of GDP. Nearly half, 48%, of all Australian households make no net contribution through their taxes. Clearly, generous spending on welfare, health and other programs is something that Australia should and does aspire to. But a country, no matter how rich, that continues to run deficits while spending ever-increasing amounts on entitlements is headed for certain disaster. So some changes to our society will be made. I believe these changes protect the most vulnerable and most importantly, put our country onto a sustainable footing, something which the Labor Party is not interested in, and they've vacated the space in that respect. Thank you, Mr Deputy.